All right, so today we will be talking about the art of the Americas after year 1300. Sometimes this is referred to as the pre-Columbian era or post-contact. So we can refer to it in either of those terms today. This module spans a large geographic region, uh, multiple cultures, and 5 historical eras. In this lecture, we will investigate the art of the Americas from pre-European contact to the contemporary moment. The founding of Tenochtitlan. From the Codex Mendoza, which functions as a picture book on European paper, this introduces us to the contact between the pre-Columbian world and Europe. The King of Spain ruled the viceroyalty of New Spain from 1521 to 1821. And that covered the geographic region of current day Mexico and Central America. He appointed a minister called the Viceroy of New Spain. And he was called to govern the colonial territory. Native artists painted these pages, and Don Antonio de Mendoza, the first viceroy of New Spain, probably annotated the manuscript in Spanish. The manuscript includes a history of Aztec rulers, annual tributes paid by towns to the last emperor, Moctezuma, and the life cycle from birth to death. even though even though book production was common under the Aztec civilization, most manuscripts did not survive because Europeans destroyed them. The page that we're viewing here, the Codex Mendoza, depicts the founding of Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, which is modern day Mexico City, and it was founded in 1345. The Aztecs spoke Nahuatl and claimed to be nomads from Aztlan, the legendary place of origin of the Aztecs. In the early 14th century, the Aztecs were driven from their settlement. Legend says that Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec god of war, promised to lead them to a new homeland, which he would signal by showing an island in a lake where an eagle holding a serpent was sitting on a cactus. The eagle, still the national emblem of Mexico, is an Aztec symbol for the sun. You may recognize this image at the center of the founding of Tenochtitlan from its modern usage as the central image on the Mexican flag. In the 4 quadrants, which possibly represent wards of the city, are the city's 10 founders. Below are 2 conquest scenes, each depicting the burning of a temple. And around the margin is the 51-year count of the first Aztec leader's Tenex rule from 1325 to 1375. All right, these next 3 slides, we will be looking at the legend of Coatlicue. This powerful sculpture of Coatlicue was made in 1487 through 1520. Will help us understand the several aspects of the Aztec religion and aesthetics. Blood sacrifice was important to Aztec sculpture, and sometimes Spanish conquerors found an accumulation of human blood on some of the stone sculptures. And along with blood, sculptures were encrusted with jewels and gold. This sculpture of Coatlicue, meaning she of the serpent skirt, shows Coatlicue's decapitated head replaced by 2 snakes, which symbolizes flowing blood in Aztec iconography. In the profile, the sculpture resembles twin pyramids. And the story of Coatlicue introduces us to the importance of cosmology for Aztecs, evidenced by the origin stories they created for the celestial movements that they witnessed. So the story goes that while cleaning a temple, Coatlicue was legendarily impregnated by a ball of feathers. Her existing daughter, and forgive me, I'm pretty bad at my pronunciation. I believe it's Quetzalcoatl, and her 500 sons were enraged by the pregnancy and plotted to kill her. So when they decapitated her, the Aztec god of war, Huitzilopochtli, rose fully grown from Coatlicue's severed head and dismembered Quetzalcoatl. And then he, in this origin story, was equated with the sun, and she was representative of the moon. And the dismemberment of the moon is depicted as um, the phases of the moon. So her dismemberment, right, the bowels coming out, is kind of supposed to be reflective of like the different phases of the moon. And then her 500 brothers were representatives of the stars. Um, and each night, Huitzilopochtli, as the sun, chases and then defeats Quetzalcoatl and her brothers, the moon and the stars, to create the dawn of a new day. It's a very interesting way of looking at celestial bodies. And so this is the head of Quetzalcoatl after she was decapitated and dismembered, so that we can see, her whole body kind of divided up as part of this legend. All right, the double headed serpent. So, the serpent, as a symbol of duality, was a fundamental part of the Aztec religion. For the Aztecs, the serpent was a symbol of regeneration, resurrection, and fertility. And this is explored through Coatlicue. I'm sorry, Coatlicue. Further, the Aztec double headed serpent was made of 2,000 pieces of turquoise on a curved wooden frame, with red shells for the snout and gums and white shells for the teeth. When you see light reflected on the sculpture, it alters the colors to look like feathers. So it functions as an earth dwelling snake and a sky dwelling bird. And that signifies the duality of the feather serpent deity Quetzalcoatl. So the symbol of the serpent kind of shows the fusion of heaven and earth, eternity and renewal. And this beautiful work of art was most likely worn or carried during a religious ceremony. So we're going to look at some of the effects of the trade routes that were going on at this time in the 14th century. So we've studied kind of a little bit in like Asian history, how different influences from Greece all the way to China to India were kind of affecting the artwork there. And we can see in this map that it also translates from uh, Hispanic culture in Spain through China and India and Islamic cultures and is transported over to the Americas. So, this particular vase is part of the Hispanic Society of America's collection in New York and emphasizes the syncretic nature of colonial American art production. We can see the historic and geographic dialogues taking place in the 18th century during the colonial period of the Americas, very similar to the cultural production uh, and exchanges brought on by the Silk Road. So the Spanish crown's ship, the Manila Galleon, brought porcelain, silk, ivory, and spices from China to Mexico in exchange for silver. It sailed through the Philippines, which, like much of the Americas, was also under Spanish rule. Of particular importance to this lesson is the subject depicted on this face. So um, we can see that there's Chinese ceramics, which depict this blue and white motif with a crane like design that incorporates the history of blue and white Islamic ceramic production and the history of Chinese porcelain with a now familiar Mexican subject, the eagle alighting on top of a cactus to mark the founding Tenochtitlan. So this is all done in part because we have these trade routes influencing artisans in, quote, the New World. This kind of exposure that's changing and kind of defining some new artistic traditions. Okay. This painting, uh, from kind of jumping ahead in time, right? We're in 1855 now. The Inhabitant of Cordillera. This is by the Peruvian painter Francisco Lasso. And it focuses on ceramics and pre Columbian motifs as well. In this painting, he's depicting an idealized native figure. And the figure holds a jar from the Moche culture, which you'll probably recognize from our previous lecture. The Moche civilization, which was mostly active during the years 100 through 800 CE, was agriculturally based and located on the northern Peruvian coast. And their ceramic production was varied and included works such as three-dimensional ruler portraits, animals, and the one depicted here of a prisoner with a rope around his neck and his hands tied behind his back. Lasso painted this work 30 years after Peru declared its independence from Spain. The Inhabitant of the Cordillera functions even today as an allegory of the continued repression of the indigenous peoples of Peru. Lasso equated the imagery on the Moche vessel with the plight of the mid 19th century indigenous peoples in Peru who did not have the same rights as the Peruvian Creole population. Peruvian citizens who were descendants of Spaniards, but who were born in Peru. Lasso painted in the realist style, popularized in France in the 1840s. And this particular work was meant for a European audience at the Paris Universal Exhibition of 1855. This exhibition was a fair that displayed new technologies, industry related inventions, and works of art from around the world. Lasso hung this painting, Inhabitant of Cordillera, with an imaginary portrait of Gonzalo Pizarro, who accompanied his brother, the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro, to Peru in 1532 and captured the Inca capital of Cusco. This juxtaposition drew a direct connection between the historical exploits and the oppression of the Spanish invaders and contemporary 19th century struggles for equality within the indigenous population. So this painting, also from the 1850s, is Juan Cordero's Columbus Before the Catholic Monarchs, and it highlights the search for identity that the newly formed nation of Mexico sought to imagine after it gained independence from Spain in 1821. Mexicans wanted to examine their own past instead of Europe's history in the context of the new Republic of Mexico. Cordero created the first secular Mexican history painting, and it is an example of the first time the Mexican public saw American subject matter represented in history painting. Hmm. History painting was the highest genre in the official French salon's hierarchy, and in Mexico's official art academy, the Academy of San Carlos, founded in 1781. So most painters at the Academy of San Carlos prior to Cordero's work painted European historical narratives mythologies, and religious subjects. So this was kind of a big shift, right? We're no longer only examining Mexico's past through a historical lens of Europe. It's kind of trying to reimagine its own history. We compare this to the painting of the coronation of Napoleon and Josephine. Although this is an American subject, Cordero was in dialogue with European works such as Jacques Louis David, and this is Jacques Louis David's painting, Coronation of Napoleon and Josephine, which was painted just a few decades earlier. Cordero painted his work while living in Italy as a tribute to the Italians, and Columbus was from Italy, from Genoa. So Cordero revealed the hierarchical nature of the Spanish court through his representation of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, the military, the church, and Christopher Columbus. Columbus acts as a conduit between the old and new worlds and mediates visually between the Europeans and the indigenous people. Cordero depicted him as the one who brought civilization to the quote, barbaric Americas, which is a common misconceived European projection. Tellingly, the Mexican critics at the time were more interested in Columbus and the monarchs than the Native American figures. Pre-Hispanic indigenous peoples were essentially invisible in academic painting until Cordero. However, Cordero painted his own portrait as an indigenous person in profile. Cordero was a Creole. He's a descendant of Spanish parents, but born in Mexico. And his choice of depiction was uh, indicates his identification with his Mexican indigenous past. So this theme, which we have seen present in Peru around the same time period, would remain prevalent in 20th century and 21st century artists' work. So here is a great example of that. This is the history of Mexico, Mexico today and tomorrow, painted by Diego Rivera. And this is part of the modern Mexican muralists movement. And this is a cultural fusion also seen in the work of modern Mexican artists such as Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, Rufino Tamayo, who incorporated pre-Columbian imagery into their art. The Mexican mural movement began in post-revolutionary Mexico in the 1920s under President Alvaro Obregón in office from the 1920 to 1924. And it was the only avant-garde art in Latin America to receive government support in the 1920s. I'm going to pause this recording here so I can put this into two videos. So bear with me for one moment.